So, towards the end of the book, Initiation into Hermetics by Franz Bardon, he goes into developing clairsentience, clairvoyance, clairaudience, in towards the end of the book and the psychic training. And one of the things I found is, and Barden says this at the beginning of the book, I mean, it kind of presupposes you've been meditating and engaged in some mystical practices for a while before you start to really pick it up. So, that having said, I've kind of realized that as you go on and you just develop your inner world through meditations and your own path and whatever you really found, say, before you end up taking initiation into Hermetics seriously. And if you haven't and you just start off with that, I think it will seem real far fetched and almost a little fantastic and maybe exaggerated and maybe even not true. But I think it seems completely true if you've come to a lot of the things, even if somewhat unconsciously or just tacitly, without even really realizing that's what it was, if you've come to that organically in a process of just your own spiritual growth. I mean, a lot of what I found as I went deeper and deeper into meditation is the kinesthetics of my inner self were developed. The visual orientations of my inner self were developed. And I'm more kinesthetic and visual than audio. I don't take in information as much through hearing. In fact, I kind of like to just shut hearing down, to have lots of silence so there's not as much noise. And then, I guess the clairvoyance and the clairsentience would work better. But, what happened to me is after I got to a certain point, I started to realize I was really intuitive, and on a whim, years ago, I just started applying at psychic networks to be a psychic and just started getting jobs and working as a psychic on psychic hotlines. And I was realizing that, like, what they or what a lot of people were calling psychic was something I had just kind of come to naturally. And I didn't think of it as psychic necessarily in the kind of stereotypical way because that sounded like way too um, almost surreal or fantastic or even exaggerated. It felt like further ahead than I was. But I realized that, the intuition was completely there and people could call up and I could just kind of sense what was going on with them. And it was kind of obvious and it didn't necessarily feel like any special ability. But I also realized I hadn't always been like that. And, I know some people are just born with certain unique gifts in this area and they just have them and that's just that. And they may even be a mess in every other way in their life, but they have some special ability. I never, that's not my story. But because my story was just kind of more of a gradual, natural developing of the inner world and intuition and spiritual muscles, if you will, and soul muscles, if you will. But because it kind of happened that way, I tend to think that if anybody goes along far enough in the spiritual path, eventually, whatever they're kind of predisposed to, um, basically whatever spiritual gift that they're kind of meant to have or is kind of unique to their specific personality or their specific eternal personality, if you want to think of it like that, will just start to kind of flourish and develop if it's meant to. So going back to Barden, Bardon talks about, being able to conjure up the images in my own kind of psychic or astral sense. Conjure up the different sounds, conjure up the different feelings, so I can generate them myself, so I can basically learn the difference between what I'm generating myself and what's coming out of me versus what I'm picking up on from the outside. And that's completely true, and the exercises are great, and I definitely encourage that. He goes about it in a very, very systematic way. I would say, I would say it can be done just in a lot more general sense. I mean, even things like, NLP and certain forms of cognitive psychology will just talk about, your whole visual apparatus and the way you start imagining things and replaying events in your mind or playing future events in advance. Whether you're doing that visually, by images, or you're hearing certain things, or you're feeling certain things. I mean, we all have associations with that stuff. So, I mean, in a sense, when you're talking about being able to see this and see that, and then try to imagine this in your astral sight, when Barton's saying that, I mean, it's really the advanced systematic way of basically saying, get to know yourself and get to know the way around yourself in all the different channels through which you can process things and all the different levels at which you can process things, and get to know maybe where your own stuck buttons are and loosen up those stuck buttons, and have all the different kind of muscles. And when I say muscles, I'm just talking about, the psychic abilities, whether it's clairvoyance or clairsentience. Those are just different muscles on the inside that you're just kind of loosening up, and you're getting to know one from the other and being able to access them at will. And then once you're able to do that, much much easier to get a clearer read on something coming from the outside. um, to be transparent, I've never gotten to a point where I'm like anywhere near one for one on any of this stuff. It has never been a seemingly one for one thing. Bardon makes it out as if you could just master it at every single level and know every single thing almost. And hey, more power to folks that get there. Um, I've never experienced it like that. I've always experienced that there's some sort of translational kind of vortex or translational filter between the three different levels he talks about. So there's some sort of translational filter. Like, I mean, he'll talk about the physical, the psychic, and the mental, and I think there's a translational filter with all of those, because all of those are going to be experiencing things on different levels and processing things on different levels. So when you're really talking something like clairvoyance, you're really kind of talking, okay, well, this is something going on in Earth, physical, that you're taking into your astral vision. So there's a translational filter. So that's why I'm saying it's not necessarily one for one. But whatever the translational filter is with that, I think is going to be unique to each individual. And I think that's kind of one of the benefits of these exercises, that you kind of get to learn about your own filters, and you get to know your way around your own filters, and you get to know when your own filters are getting in the way of you being able to filter the truth. So hope that's not too muddled, but that's just, that's my initial thought on it, unrehearsed, just coming up here talking about this subject because I actually just reread that chapter in Initiation into Hermetics. So that's what went through my mind right now. Hope that helps somebody out there. You like this video. Take care, all my friends.